right, Brian. Okay. Let's see. I think we are live now. Yeah, it says live on Facebook. So thank you, everyone, for your patience. We've had some technical difficulties. Apparently, Facebook now requires a two-step authentication. So that means just like trying to get into the Continental Army encampment at Valley Forge or Morristown, I needed a secondary passcode. So tonight, though, we are taking a virtual trip north into the Mohawk Valley to the fort that's in a discussion with the Fort Plain and with Brian Mack, who does great things up there to preserve the history. I'll let Brian Mack jump into his whole introduction, but he has a passion for his family and for history. Just like when I was growing up, a lot of my family vacations included a stop at a historic site or two, so I didn't fall too far from the proverbial apple tree. He's involved with the Fort Plain Museum and Historical Park as a member of the Board of Trustees. He's a board member with the Stone Arabia Preservation Battlefield, board member with the Mohawk Country Association, Country Association. He's also joined the board of the Dr. Joseph Warren Foundation. He still holds down a full-time job and actually can get into Nerf gun fights with his kids on the weekend. So I think he might sleep maybe, 2-3 hours a night or something. So Brian, I'll let you take it in there to kind of introduce yourself farther.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Phil, for having me, and thank you to the good folks at Emerging Revolutionary War. I definitely appreciate you having me on. I usually don't get asked to do these things. I usually work behind the scenes, whether if it's putting on conferences or speaking programs or, selling one of our many titles in our bookstores that I mail out to people. I felt like I made many new friends that way, but but basically, I grew up here in upstate New York, pretty much in the Mohawk River Valley all my life. Actually, where I kind of grew up was more southern Adirondacks. So that's kind of the history I got into first. Like you said, my parents, one of our family vacations was a long weekend up to Lake Placid. And, we went to look at all the Olympic venue sites and the abolitionist John Brown's homestead up there and a few other sites, added into some other fun things like, we did, I think it was called the North Pole Santa's Workshop. So they did a good job of mixing in history and fun stuff. And I'm kind of passing that along to my family as well. I'm married to my great wife, Liz, who puts up with all this stuff and me. So she's definitely a saint. I got two wonderful kids, Grayson and Evelina. Grayson's going to be 10 here in about 2 weeks, and Evelina turned 8 in August. And we have an Australian Shepherd dog named Sunny. And so basically, we do a lot of fun things, whether if it's a family trip, we always hit up a historic site or two. We do a lot of camping up at the Adirondacks. So, a lot of times we hit stuff there, but basically, all my life, I, always had history was always in my heart. I always loved the subject in school. Definitely when they talked about the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, that stuff really piqued my interest, especially, when they showed you first how they used to line up and just used to take aim and shoot back and forth at each other. I'd always kind of like, always wowed me, like, wow, they really did that and what have you. But and basically then, as I got older in high school, I went more towards the sports stuff and, avid Yankee and Vikings fan. And, so I played those sports. And so, history kind of was a back burner. But then when I went back to college, I was required to take a history class, even though my concentration major was accounting, auditing, and stuff like that. So basically I had to take one kind of prerequisite class that was required for a 4-year degree. So I took a religious history class because the college I graduated was from the College of St. Rose in Albany, New York. And so I took one history, it was a religious history class. The teacher was really great because he really tied a lot of the history that happened here in upstate New York. There was some of those, Christian movements, and I believe the Mormon founder was also from up here before it actually went out west. So, and then the way he did it was he actually tied what he was teaching the sites that you could go see. So that started to pique my interest. And then when it came time, I had to do some community service for college. I picked Old Fort Johnson just here outside of Amsterdam, New York. Old Fort Johnson is a 1747 homestead of Sir William Johnson. He was a key landholder here in the Mohawk Valley. He had great relationships with the Iroquois, especially in the Mohawk tribe. And basically, he had a lot of influence over things, and he ended up dying in July of 1774, so just prior to the Revolution. And his family, when the Revolution started, all all remained loyal to the crown and ended up losing all their holdings here in the Mohawk Valley and were forced up to Canada. But yeah, back to me. So basically, real quick, I'll just finish up. So basically, I volunteered at Old Fort Johnson, just really got it in history. My wife, before we were married one day, was like, oh, let's take a ride in the car. And we started looking at the roadsides. We have this, the metal placards that have like little history tidbits or two. So we started looking at this. So, my interest has started to grow. And then my wife, where she lived across the street, her and her brother, she has a younger brother, a couple of years younger, and there was a set of siblings that lived across the street from them, and they were best friends with them. And their father actually is the chairman of the board of the Fort Plain Museum. So they did this wonderful event back in 2008. This was before I was on the board, and they did this event where, because George Washington in 1783, when it was July, August, towards the end of July, August, came up and he did like a trip through upstate New York. He went up north to Ticonderoga, Crown Point, Saratoga Battlefield, came down through like Boston Spa area, which is the south of Saratoga. And then, of course, stopped at Albany with Schuyler. And then he came out west here and wanted to look at all the things that happened out here. He went all the way out to Fort Schuyler, Fort Stanwix, check that out. Then he actually kind of made his headquarters at Fort Plain, which at the time when he was here was called Fort Rensselaer. I'll get more into that in a little bit. And basically they went and, checked out the area, the Cherry Valley Massacre, and spent, several days here just touring and, visiting with people. And, when he was at Fort Plain, they inspected the troops, they had a dinner, they had like a little reception and what have you. But basically, yeah. And so they did this event based on that history, and they had Dean Melissa, who portrays George, or I think he used to portray George Washington. I believe he might have retired now. So they had him up here, and it was a great weekend. This guy, actually, when you were talking to him, you actually thought you were talking to George Washington. That's how great he was. And so my wife and I went, and we loved it. And so I got to talk with Norm Bullen, Liz's friend's parents, or friend's father there. And so basically, as we got talking, he's like, oh, you should help out and volunteer. So he kind of gave me the hook a little bit, and I took it, and I joined the board, I believe, in like end of 2010, and here I am now. Sorry for rambling.
Oh no, yeah, you're fine. So the good segue there as Washington toured the area. So let's go take a step back initially. What's important about why Fort Plain is there, the Mohawk Valley or River Valley? Why is that? Why did they put forts there? I guess. Yeah. Let's start there.
Yeah, basically, well, the fort in Fort Plain, there was all these little settlements up and down, both sides of the Mohawk River Valley. And in our area, which is south of the Mohawk River Valley, it's called the Canajoharie District. If you go look at a map today, you see the town and village of Canajoharie, which is, more on the eastern part of what was Canajoharie back in the 18th century. Back in the 18th century, Canajoharie encompassed the whole land of what we call the noses. The noses are the two, they're like mountain type breaks where the Mohawk River Valley flows through. And that's like the only actual natural break in the Appalachian mountain chain is right there in the Mohawk River Valley, is these two noses. So they basically look like two big cliffs on each side of the river, looking at each other. So they call them the noses. And so basically from the noses going all the way west to the current day city of Little Falls. So it encompasses a pretty large area. It was called the Canajoharie District. And now if you go look at Canajoharie, it's only a little smidgen of that, which, Fort Plain was part of Canajoharie. So you had this big district with all these settlements in. And so during the Revolution, there was all these, a lot of loyalists picked up and left. You had, the Mohawk tribe remained allied with the British. So, you were on Mohawk lands as well. And there was all these raids and stuff coming in. So basically forts and fortified homes were pretty much set up to provide protection, for people of the settlements. And so basically if, the alarm rang and raiders were coming through, it gave them a chance to, have a place for protection. So Fort Plain basically started as a fort like that. It started off as like a small stockade. You had the Cherry Valley Massacre in November of 1778. So we don't have an exact record that says, Fort Plain was built on this date. Matter of fact, when in August of 1780, there was a pretty good sized raid led by Joseph Brant that came through our area, burned down a lot of the settlements. And they talk about a fort, with no name, like a little fort that basically, they try not to attack the fort. So they were avoiding it. But in some of the correspondence after the, where they're talking about the destruction and, so they, in one of the letters, I believe it says, John Abeel's house, which is Cornplanter's father, actually lived, his house is right on the, the hill below the fort. They actually burnt his house. So as they're talking about that, they mentioned a fort with no name wasn't bothered or something, or just below the fort with no name. So basically we know that was Fort Plain. Basically Fort Plain was built probably towards the end of 78 going into the spring of 79. So basically it started off as a stockade just to for the inhabitants to just go in. So if the alarm rang, they had a place for refugee. But then that raid, I was just talking about the August 2nd raid with Brant, where, was bringing more dangerous times. And so General Van Rensselaer, he was the general of the Albany militia at the time, came through. And when they came through, you had the big raids after August 2nd. You had the Sir John Johnson raids, where that was part of the Battle of Stone Arabia and Clark's Field. So they, in October, you had this big prong coming down from Canada. They came through, they swept all the way down through Schoharie River Valley, which is about south east of us. And then they came back up through the Mohawk River Valley. And they basically, there's several reasons. We're actually having a battlefield study right now. It's almost complete. That's going to come out about the battles of Stone Arabia, Clark's Field. That'll get into the whole reasons behind this. But pretty much they came through, they raided. So when Van Rensselaer and the Albany County Militia came from Albany and they came west to kind of provide some relief, he kind of establishes Fort Plain as his headquarters. So he sees this little fort. It's on a top of a huge hilltop. He establishes his headquarters. Then you get the Battle of Stone Arabias and Clark Field. Sir John Johnson and the British and the Indian allies are able to retreat across the river at night after the Clark's Field battle. This was October 19th, 1780. And basically they were allowed to get away at night, and Van Rensselaer didn't really pursue him hard enough. I guess depends who you ask. And so he was basically, the local people didn't like him. He was actually brought up on court martial. I believe it, he's found innocent of any wrongdoing, but basically he establishes that his headquarters. They call it Fort Rensselaer. You got other people that want to call it Fort Plain. So we have this identity of like all these names that, back in the 19th century, historians couldn't get it right. They were actually calling another homestead in the current day village of Canajoharie that still stands. And they were actually calling that Fort Rensselaer. And they were saying George Washington was there. But, after all the research and source documents were found and stuff, we definitely know that wasn't Fort Rensselaer, that Fort Plain was. There's Colonel Marinus Willett. There's letters going back and forth about the whole issue with the name change. So that, there was just a lot going on. George Washington, I think Norm Bolin, our chairman that I was talking about earlier, really wrote this excellent book called George Washington, the Mohawk Frontier. And he really gets into all that stuff about the naming of the forts. And even, in the book, he shows some examples where, somebody's writing to Washington and calling it Fort Rensselaer and they're looking for supplies. And then somebody else is calling it Fort Plain. So George Washington is even thinking there's two forts and he's like, what's going on? And finally has to be, included in that Fort Rensselaer. But basically, so it was a stockade in 79, 80, end of 1780, Van Rensselaer comes in. And then after that, I believe it was in like May of 1781, Colonel Marinus Willett establishes it as his headquarters. And then they start to build up the hilltop into this kind of huge, massive fort complex. They built this huge 3-story blockhouse, like on the opposite side of the hill from the stockade. And they just built up the fort with different fortifications. We found through archaeology the site of the blockhouse. We found the site of the bake shop, the blacksmith shop. We know where the stockade and all the barracks and stuff were. And then even through aerial photographs from the 70s and some other stuff, you could see, where they took the photos. You can even see stuff in the grass where it looks like, there's a redoubt and some different things that were, different earthworks. So it's kind of really neat. And it basically, kind of remained a fort. I was through the end of the war, and it kind of became a supply depot. And there's even some people who travel through and they say they see the fort or the blockhouse because they really stored supplies there. And I believe in 1800, when they were building the naval I believe down in New York City. They were building naval ships. They eventually moved a lot of the supplies from Fort Plain, the cannon and guns and stuff down to there to supply those ships. So that's basically, in a nutshell, the history of that.
So when the Colonel Marnus Willett comes in, who are the troops? Are these just all New York militia that are going to fight in these small little engagements, or are they Continental soldiers as well?
Yeah, there's a mix of both. Actually, they started to raise New York levies, which I believe were kind of militia. I know I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm not going to try to explain it. But New York levies are, they're kind of like, they're not necessarily considered like continental service, but they're treated more like an army. I believe they get they might get uniforms, but they're basically, I don't know. I don't want to use the term full-time militia. Maybe somebody's on Facebook feed that will correct me on that. And if there is somebody, please do so, because but basically there was the New York State levies, there was some militia in and out, and there was some continental troops. The Second New Hampshire was stationed there in like 1782. Don Haggis wrote that book, The Last Men of the Revolution, based on the last men back during the Civil War. You had this Reverend Hilliard that went around and took pictures and interviewed like 6 or 7 surviving Rev War soldiers that were still surviving back in like the early 1860s, or I believe it was during the Civil War. So Don Haggis a few years ago took the concept of that book and redid it, because Hilliard just went around and took these guys' story and just basically whatever they said, he just put that in the book and said that's what they did. Don Haggis actually went through each of the 6 soldiers and verified what they did and what they really did, and then included the original text from the original book from the 1860s. And there's a nice comparison and stuff. But anyways, one of the guys, Samuel Downing, who had his picture taken and survived up through the Civil War, I believe it was like 107 when he died, actually served at Fort Plain, and he had his picture taken. So it was kind of neat that we had somebody here from the 2nd New Hampshire Continental Regiment and had his photograph, and we actually were able to find an original photograph that was printed. It looks like a little baseball card, like from the early 1900s, and so we were able to find one. We have it on exhibit, and so it was kind of neat to see the face of somebody that actually was there when the fort was there.
No, that's amazing. Especially you don't get that link too often. On that same, so these actions against Sir John Johnson, what are they? I don't want to call them like the side campaign. How do they fit into like a larger picture if someone's trying to figure out the history?
Well, it's kind of interesting because we're currently with the National Park Service and through South River Heritage Consultant Wade Katz and Robert Selig. They're working on the battlefield study, and then we also have through the museum we have the Stone Arabia Battlefield Committee. So we've been talking about this a lot and the importance of these raids that came in towards there in the October 1780. And you also had some raids. There was also, you not only had Johnson's raid, but there was 2 other raids from Canada. You had one that was hitting like the Saratoga area and through Boston Spa. There was this, I think on the same day, October 19th, the area of Boston was also burned out and raided. And then also there was another prong that was going through Vermont and raiding, or it wasn't Vermont then, but, current day Vermont now. And so it was kind of like, as we're looking at this, we did find a couple letters in the Haldeman papers that made me kind of suggest, like, all right, the British, they don't know how the war is going to end, but then those up in Canada, because, I mentioned I volunteered at Old Fort Johnson, but in 1762, Sir William Johnson builds this other huge mansion in the current city of Johnstown. And I believe it was 62, 63 that it was built and completed. So then he moved up there. Sir John lived in Old Fort Johnson. So you have these 2 big mansions, and they still both survive to this day. They're both open as Sir Johnson Hall's a state historic site, and Old Fort Johnson is a not-for-profit site, and you could both go visit them in the summer. But those were both his homes, and so just that one family alone, but you had other families that were allied with them and were loyalists, and they had a lot to lose if they didn't win the war. They were losing a lot of land holdings. So between that and a couple letters, I don't want to, we're still kind of, so I don't want to just throw things out there, but there seems to be maybe something that ties in with depopulating the area, or at least moving out the area so they can claim it in case however the war ends, they can maybe set up shop and take stronghold of their lands back and say, all right, well, we're here, whatever, you can't kick us out. So there's some of that. And, not to mention, the Mohawk River Valley is supplying wheat to the Continental Army. So, you have that aspect of it. They were coming through, they were burning, areas and, killing livestock and burning farms and supplies and stuff. So, you got that aspect of it too. And, and then also, it kind of almost corresponds with Benedict Arnold and the whole treason at West Point. And, so did that tie with it? So that's, our consultants are looking at all that stuff and seeing if there is a bigger picture. So unfortunately, they're not quite done with it yet, where I could say it's that, but, hopefully within the next month or two, we'll be able to put something out there.
I mean, it's kind of, we were talking 2 weeks ago on Cowpens, how like it's a neighbor versus neighbor thing. Same thing's happening in New York and so forth. We do have one question that's kind of along that, someone you mentioned earlier, the chief Cornplanter, Sandy writes that, is this the same one that's buried in the reservation in Salamanca, New York? If I pronounce it right, I'm curious if his tribe traversed the entire southern tier of New York.
To be honest with you, I don't know where he's buried. There's really only one Cornplanter, John Abiel. He was a fur trader, I believe, and actually, I don't believe he was married to Cornplanter's mother, but fur trade and all that stuff going down. And so, that was Cornplanter's father. And actually, when they raided in August 2nd, he actually came to the house and introduced himself. Remember me as your son, and actually gave his father the ultimatum of staying or going back with them, or they wouldn't kill him, but they would let him stay, and he chose to stay. But anyways, I'm not quite sure where Cornplanter. What I'll do is I'll find that out for you, and I'll just I'll look for the message on the link here, and I'll let you know. I'm not sure if I don't know. I only know one Cornplanter, so if they say corn, it's probably him, but I'll definitely check that for you.
I add it to the research, see what rabbit hole you go down, right? That's how it works. So let's talk a little bit. So we have Fort Plain, Rensselaer. I can't pronounce that, our Baltimore accent. And we also have the Stone Arabia. So are they in the same area? How far distant are these two?
Yeah, they're pretty much in the same area because, during those battles, you had troops at Fort Plain that actually go over and, because I'll start from the beginning of that day. It's October 19th, 1780. You got Sir John Johnson. They were camping out by those noses I was talking about earlier. And then that morning they start coming more west towards Stone Arabia. And that's where the early morning engagement. So they engage. So it's Brant, and that's where Colonel John Brown is killed. I won't get into too much details of the fighting, but pretty much they clash. Colonel John Brown is killed right on the spot, and basically it's a victory for the British. It's not, it's a long moving battle. So basically, if you ever come to the current day Fort Plain, we're on kind of there's a kind of a weird bend in the river. So sometimes we're on actually the east side or the south, but basically we're on the south part of the river. Stone Arabia is on the opposite side of the river, not quite directly, almost diagonally across, maybe, a couple miles, but basically it's all in the same area. Stone Arabia is part of the Palatine district. So we're part of the Canajoharie district on the south side, and Stone Arabia is part of the Palatine district on the north side.
Okay. So what is left of the battlefield then because you sit on that board?
Yeah, so basically, the Fort Plain Museum, we took up the initiative of getting a National Park Service grant through the ABPP, American Battlefield Protection Program, and so we just want to set off. Even though we're Fort Plain, we're kind of in. We try to cover the whole Mohawk Valley in our area as far as the war goes. So we set up this committee of historians that have been doing it for a lot longer than I have, since the 70s, 60s. One of our board members, Wayne Lenig, he's been doing this since the 60s, doing all this research, driving out to all these different little places and finding stuff. We have another excellent historian, James F. Morrison, who's been doing this since he was a teenager. And it's been their life, since, the 60s, 70s. And it's just amazing of all the stuff they know. So basically we put this committee together. The battlefield now is currently the majority of it's farmland or, homes. And it's really, so it's actually kind of, I don't want to use the word pristine or untouched, but it's basically, it's not like there's no factories, there's not a Walmart on it, so it's basically, it's just nice countryside, nice farm. And so basically, we're getting a study done. We want to understand the battles better, why they happen, what took place during the battles. And basically then we could put it out there. And then the Clocks battlefield, which came second in the day, because both battles were on the same day. So basically they were like one battle. You had you had Stone Arabia kind of in the morning, then the battle starts shifting. The British start moving more to the west, and Van Rensselaer finally catches up, because Van Rensselaer wasn't there for the Stone Arabia battle, but they catch up for Clocks Field. That happens in the afternoon. Then there's this afternoon battle until dark, and it's kind of a running battle going down, along the river through current day St. Johnsville. And so St. Johnsville is a little more built up, more homes, more residential stuff. There's a couple of factories. So that battlefield, it's not gonna, there's not going to be any more building on it, but it's not like the Stone Arabia part of it where it's mostly farm fields. And so basically the study will help us see what we can preserve, see what we can do, whether if we can build a battlefield park. Now I'm on the Stone Arabia Preservation Society. That's the church group there. There's a church there that was burned out during the battle. They rebuilt it in 1788, and that church still stands. And there's a really great group there that's been taking care of that church for a while now. And so basically, that's also the site where John Brown was buried. So his grave is there as well. So there's a lot of good history there with the church and the area. And we're just hoping, with the museum and coming together and, try to, whether if it's a battlefield, I don't want to call it another battlefield park, but we do have some visions of that, or at least we'll be able to interpret it through some more signage and some other programs and stuff.
So good segue there as well. So from that, it's from what I've seen, I've not made the visit up to Fort Plain. It's on the list to do. But you do have some decent acreage. It's not just the fort or the museum, correct?
Yeah, like pretty much well, it's kind of funny. We own the majority of the fort site, except for earlier when I was explaining the stockade part that came first. That's actually on the Fort Plain. The Fort Plain Cemetery sits right next to us. And so basically they own the part that the stockade part was on. And it's kind of funny because they did bury on some of the outer fortifications, because actually if you, when you come up, I give you a whole tour, you can see the whole layout. But basically, yeah, we do own a lot of property. I believe it's, I don't misquote, it's, I don't know, 120 acres comes to mind, but I could be misquoting. But basically, yeah, it's a lot of area. We got a lot of, interpretive signage. There's not, there's no existing buildings or anything like that. There are some earthworks you can see. That's kind of cool. But basically, that's what we're actually striving for, which I'll get into in a little bit. Is actually we're putting together this whole strategic plan for the museum, not only to add on museum buildings, but also to reconstruct some of the buildings for educational purposes, enhance the park through there with nice walking trails, with more signage, possibly archaeology sites, and what have you. Like, we do have aspirations to rebuild the blockhouse. It's a big 3-story square blockhouse. It's, we got the plans for it. I think in the early 80s that, somebody actually found the plans from the blockhouse in the American Antiquarian Society out in Boston. And so we actually have the exact plans to rebuild it. It's just, we're going to put together a whole strategic plan for the museum. We're going to fundraise and hopefully start putting the fort back in Fort Plain, which that's how the museum started. And so.
So for starting that, so right now, if someone comes up, these plans are in motion, but what is the museum like?
Currently the museum, it's you had the same family. So it was the Leip family that lived on the site when the fort was there. They continued to live there, probably through almost early 1900s, maybe even through the 1900s, mid 1900s. And so basically the current museum is an 1847 stone house. It also includes the rebuilt I don't want to call it a replica, but there was a colonial home that was attached to it, and it was either taken down or fell down in the late 1800s. So they kind of in the early 2000s they rebuilt this building, and the museum is decent size. We got a lot of exhibits in this new building I was talking about that they built in 2000. And the main floor of it, it's all entire exhibit is the American Revolution in the Mohawk Valley, and it covers it from beginning to end. So as you walk through and wander through, you're learning about the war in the Mohawk Valley from 75 right on through the end in 83. You're also learning about the fort too. So the fort, the different phases of the fort are in, the proper timeline. So as you went through and that's been, we finished that exhibit about 5 years ago, and there's artifacts that go with it to tell the story. And we got nice wall panels. We use nice images where possible, and so basically that's what one would see. Then we got obviously the bookstore is not just online. It's actually it's actually a brick and mortar building. So when you go in, you can see all 500 plus titles there. And then the other part of the museum, the Stone House, we got a lot of like the front room. We have archaeology artifacts from the blockhouse, from the fort site. There was another homestead on the other side of the river where they said George Washington stayed, was the Warmouth House. I forget his first name, but basically it was a homestead there that George Washington stayed at when he came through the area in 83. They did some archaeology before the current property owners built their garage and stuff on it. So we got artifacts from that site. And then the front living room is kind of done up to represent like the time frame of the house in 1847. And then we also have a large Native American exhibits and stuff too in there, because that's obviously goes with everything as well. So that's all incorporated in the museum. So there's really a lot of people, we hear this a lot, like, oh, we didn't know you were there, and little museum. But when they leave, they actually say, wow, that was a lot to see and a lot to do. And upstairs in the 1847 house, we got a whole room on the Stone Arabia battlefield. There's a lot of artifacts, a lot of buttons and musket balls that tell the story, came off the site, and that's all included in an exhibit. And then on the other side, we got a nice big room full of 18th, 19th century farm tools and all different kind of cool things. So yeah, it's really packed and loaded. You really get your day's worth. And not to mention, if you come up to the museum for a day, there's several other sites to see to really make it a long weekend if you want to. So
to put in another perspective, because I was doing some preliminary research for this tonight, and you type in Mohawk River Valley, you're in the Kanajahari district. So are they? How close are you? I mean, I don't want to ask the stupid question, but I will. Are you part? You said earlier you're not part of the Mohawk River Valley, but is Fort Plain in the?
No,
in
Fort Plain is. Yeah, I think
okay.
Fort Plain is. Yeah, earlier when I was speaking, that's where I kind of grew up, was outside of.
Okay.
But no, Fort Plain sits right on the Mohawk River. So when you're up on the hilltop and you're up on the site, you're looking right out, and there's the Mohawk River is flowing right through there. And basically, the river, we had a ferry like opposite of the museum entrance. It was Waldorf's ferry that, they would have used back in colonial times to get back and forth across the river, because there was a settlement there. So right around the fort area, there was what was called the Sand Hill Settlement. So basically the Kanajahari district was just this big, huge land that they just gave it a name. And then basically there was all these different settlement names there, Sand Hill Settlement. There was a church there. So right by the fort, there was a church, or, several homes. I'm not sure of the number, but, and so basically, yeah, it was just a little settlement right there on the river. And so back then when you think of Kanajahari district, and then I think just prior to the war, I think that's when they started using the word county. And then, we were Tryon County, named after Governor William Tryon. And so basically we were Tryon County. Then I believe just either during the war or after the war, we're actually Montgomery County now, named after General Richard Montgomery. And then the county started off as this huge county, and all these other counties were kind of broken off. And then the Kanajahari was no longer a district anymore. We became the town of Minden, the village of Fort Plain, where the fort sits now. And then to the east of us, it's just the modern day Kanajahari, where they kept the name and they just reused it for a village and a town that's just more east of us, if that kind of clears that up, hopefully.
No, it does. I appreciate it, because when you also too, so militia, when you hear about that part of New York, the militia, Tryon County,
Yeah.
isn't that also, or I might be misquoting, but isn't that Nicholas Herkheimer and
Yep.
all them? Is that the Tryon County?
Yes,
So,
sir. Mhm.
so are there men from the area, the Fort Plain, that go with him, or is there a
Yeah.
separate militia?
Yeah. Yeah, I believe all the each district. So there was, I used to know this off the top of my head. I know there were several districts. There was Wilkana-Jahari district, Palatine district. There was, I don't know if it was called the German Flats district. There might have been the Kings district, and there was maybe one more. But basically, um, there was several, and I don't want to get this wrong too. So hopefully, if I had Jim Morrison sitting here next to me, explain this all to you in like 2 seconds. But basically, each district had their own militia, and so yeah, General Herkimer, they were meeting in taverns like in current day Canajoharie, where there's a tavern still standing. They were meeting there. They were meeting in the tavern in Stone Arabia. Yeah, so basically they were gathering. All the militia came from all the areas here, and there was a Canajoharie district, I believe. I'm not sure which number, because I know there's the first Tryon County militia, second Tryon County militia, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure who gets which number, but basically I believe they numbered them down the line, but I don't want to get it wrong and even try to guess. But basically, yeah, all those militia members that went out to Riscany, and a lot of them lost their lives. Yeah, a lot of them came from our area. Yeah.
So people can visit that, and not only can you just go up for a long weekend, but you're pretty big on, also
Yeah.
virtual events, conferences, and
Yeah.
symposiums. Do you want to take a minute to talk about what's on tap, I guess?
Yeah, I'll just real quick, just going back to the museum itself. The museum was pretty much established in the early 1960s. If you're familiar with Fort William Henry in Lake George, it's the rebuilt fort. The group that rebuilt that, actually, once they were done there, or I think they were done, they decided they wanted to come to Fort Plain and put the fort in Fort Plain. It was going to be like the same concept, nice tourist attraction with the fort rebuilt. So they came in like early, I think it was 1960, 1961. They started doing work, archaeology. They excavated the whole hilltop, trying to look for the spots where the fort was. And then unfortunately, the archaeologist passed away like after a year. And basically and then the investor kind of walked away. And so basically it was left for the local inhabitants. I mentioned Wayne Lenning earlier. His father, Donald Lenning, did a lot of work on the site. So they formed the Fort Plain Group Museum, and basically they've been taking care of the site ever since. And, whether if it was archaeology in the 60s and 70s, and we even did some archaeology within the last 10 years. And, it's pretty much to where the current museum is now. Going to, like you said, you brought up our conferences. I mentioned that book earlier by Don Haggis. That when he was coming out with that book, I guess it was more than a couple of years ago. When I said a couple of years ago earlier, it's more like 5 or 6 years ago. He was, in touch with us about Samuel Downing, and I know Norm Bolin helped him with some of the stuff in the book. And so when he was like telling us what he was doing with that book, we're like, oh, when you get the book, though, we, got to have you come speak at the museum about it. And so basically we started pulling together some speakers, and then we had a couple other speakers that were interested in talking. And it basically, went from like a 2 or 3 speaker event to, it was a whole day conference. And so in 2015, we kicked that off. I believe we held it in May of that year, late May. And we're a small museum. If we do a free event at night, we get a lot of nice local people. We get maybe 20, 30 people in the room, and, we have a nice evening. And, so when we were holding the conference, we weren't expecting, more than maybe 50 people, 40, 50 people. And the first year we did it, we had 150 to 160 people signed up. And, we were just really like, really just, we couldn't believe it. It was like, we were in shock, and kind of still are. And ever since then, we've just been building on it. We moved it to June. Like this year, it's June 9th through the 12th. We did hold it last year. We held it last April. It was kind of, I don't want to call it a scale down, but we basically were able to hold it. We used to do like a fundraising dinner, so we didn't do that. And basically everything was just perfect for us in August. So we had to cancel back in 2020, able to hold it last year, which was great to see everybody again. So we're going back to our original June dates this year. And we added on to the conference this year due to COVID and having to cancel. I had a long list of speakers that I had confirmed for all these years, and I didn't want to keep pushing people off. So we actually extending the conference this year. Thursday, June 9th will be our bus tour, which I believe we're going to do a Riskety and Stanwix is going to be the theme, and General Herkimer. So it was cool that you brought them up earlier. That's going to probably be the theme of our bus tour. And so that's going to be on Thursday. And then on Friday, we'll give people the morning to do their own thing. We might even hold a book sale at the museum. And the conference is actually going to start 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Normally we don't kick it off until the evening, but we're going to start it at 1 o'clock. We're going to have probably 3 talks. And last year we started this new thing called the fireside chat, where we put up a couple chairs, a table in between. We gave a speaker and an interviewer mics, and so last year we had William Fowler, who he wrote several great books. He wrote a book about the last couple of years of the war, American Crisis. He's written a biography on John Hancock. He's written biography on Samuel Adams. He's written stuff on the naval. I believe he's even got some Civil War and French and Indian War books in there. Really great guy, great author, great speaker. So he was our first, I guess he was our guinea pig. And the interviewee, Christian Despina, who wrote Founding Martyr, the Joseph Warren biography, which is also an excellent book. And
very good.
And so basically we had Christian interview Bill, and it was great. And they just had great chemistry. There was a lot of good history, a lot of good personal stuff, a lot of good laughs, a lot of good questions from the audience. And it really just took off. So this year we're going to keep it going. And this year we got Dr. Bruce Venter, who wrote the Battle of Hubbardton book. He also has got Killed Jeff Davis Civil War books, pretty good too. And he's going to interview John Jack Buchanan, who's wrote The Road to Guilford Courthouse, The Road to Charleston, The Road to Valley Forge. And he's also got a new book coming out on Musgrove's Mill, actually, I think within another year. So that'll be something to look forward to. And so Bruce is going to interview Jack, and we think it's going to be, I know they're good friends, both of them, so that helps. So I think it's just going to be a nice back and forth, nice candid fireside chat. But we got a lot of good lineup this year. I won't go through them all, but we got Ed Langle. He's going to talk about Light Horse Harry Lee in the Southern Campaign. I spoke about Bill Fowler. He's actually going to do a talk on John Hancock and Samuel Adams. James Kirby Martin's going to give a talk on it's pretty much the warfare in the New York frontier through the entire war. So he's going to talk about the brutalness of it. And actually, I'll give you the title of his talk. It's A Contagion of Violence, the Human Slaughter in the Frontier New York, 1775 through 1783. So he's really going to get into like that nitty gritty stuff that, it's not always nice about to hear. And Mark Edward Lender, he's going to be there. He's got a new book coming out on Ticonderoga, and he's going to actually talk about a part of that book, which was John Brown's raid on Fort Ticonderoga. So before he was killed at Stone Arabia, basically, John Brown, put off this raid. So Mark will tell us all about that. We got Ricardo Herrera. He's got a new book coming out, Feeding Washington's Army, Surviving the Winter of Valley Forge of 1778. Eric Schnitzer is going to talk about the Black and African-American military men at Saratoga. He's a great historian, great speaker. His book is excellent. If you haven't gotten his book, Don Tarani's Campaign, it's definitely one worth getting. Lindsay Travinsky, she did a book a couple years ago on the cabinet, George Washington's cabinet. So she's going to tie in like councils of war in the cabinet and how the Revolutionary War shaped Washington's presidency. So she's going to tie those two in. Craig Bruce Smith's going to talk about honor in the Continental Army. We got David Head, who did a book a while back in the end of 19, I believe, which was all about the Newburgh conspiracy. Christian McBeern, he's got a new book about the American Privateers' War on the British African Slave Trade. And then Glenn F. Williams, who wrote the book Year of the Hangman, is going to talk some more about the Sullivan campaign. He's going to talk about leadership from both sides, and he's going to talk about the different people involved in, the different views from all the different angles, whether if it was, Native, British, American, and so on. And then we have Robert Selig to round it off. He's going to talk about how the Army moved from Rhode Island down to Yorktown before the surrender and what have you. So we definitely got a long, nice long weekend. It'll be a lot of fun, and
No, it sounds like, I mean, great list. We have actually Lindsay Chavinsky will be speaking at the symposium here we're holding with Historic Alexandria in September about, she's doing a different aspect. She's working on a new book, I think, on John Adams, and it'll talk about the international diplomacy. So that conference is, you said June 9th through 11th, correct?
June 9th through the 12th. So Thursday through Sunday. Yeah.
And it's so people, we got a question. What is the name of the conference? Is it the Fort Plain Rev War Conference? Yep. Okay.
No, it's called the American. Yeah, it's called the American Revolution Mohawk Valley Conference. If you just Google us, so if you put in Fort Plain Museum, or if you just type in fortplainmuseum.org or fortplainmuseum.com, it'll take you all to the same page. You'll go to our page, you'll see our events. And if you just click on the event, we're adding a second conference this year. I spoke about Sir William Johnson earlier. In October, let me just pull up in October 21st through the 23rd, we're actually kicking off our annual Sir William Johnson and the Wars for Empire conference. And it's basically going to cover everything prior to the Revolution. And so we'll get into Sir William Johnson and his relations with upstate New York and the Mohawk River Valley, to all the different wars. We have, like, Michael Laramie is going to actually be giving 2 talks because he's written several books. He did King William's War, and he also did Queen Anne's War. So he's going to talk about both of those. We got Darren Bonaparte's going to talk about wampum and Sir William Johnson and the Haudenosaunee. We got David Preston, who is our head of faculty, and he's basically our head historian on the whole conference. He wrote that book, that awesome book, Braddock's Defeat and the Battle of the Monongahela and the Road to the Revolution. He is our head of faculty. He's going to talk about Sir William Johnson and the shaping of operational environment in 1755. So he's going to kind of, kick it off, and then we got several other talks. I won't go through them all, but that's also on our website too. So, and that's also going to include a bus tour. So that's going to be a Friday through Sunday conference. We're going to do a bus tour on Friday. It's going to be all about the Battle of Lake George, I believe, in 1755. And I'm actually excited about this because I do more on the Revolution, and because of family and kids, I don't venture out because I like the Civil War too, but I don't venture there as much, and so I'll be learning a lot of stuff myself. So.
Perfect. So lots going on at the Fort Plain Museum. As we kind of wrap it up here, we're going a little bit over. So thank you, folks. For staying with. No, you're fine. Brian, we wanted to run this a little longer since we didn't get started right on time. So thank you, folks, for sticking past the 8 o'clock hour with us. A lot of great things going on at the Fort Plain Museum. Before I kick it back to Brian for final comments and closing, I just want to say that if you need a book, Brian has been great. Support that local museum. That's what Emerging Revolutionary War likes to do. We'll have to plan a trip up. Some of the historians, we tend to buy a decent amount of books. I think you've helped me get quite a selection. But there's conferences are there. The website's there. Get out and support these sites as well. But Brian, final one last awesome point, cool story, closing remark. If you want to shout out the Minnesota Vikings, you can. Because,
no, I won't do that because that's awful. No, I just want to say thank you, Phil. Thank you, Emerging Revolutionary War. I love what you guys are doing. I think it's great to see all these groups and what they're doing, and whether if it's us at Fort Plain, you guys, there's several other groups like us that are just out there really hitting the history hard and really just trying to get it out there for people and making it available. And I think, I'm pretty sure I can speak for all of us when I say it's been a really great success to see all the, I've met so many wonderful people through this that, I can't even, some days I wake up, I got to pinch myself because there's just, all, people from, I used to, say, oh, I have a lot of nice friends here, but I say I got friends from all over the country, and it's, I'm not lying when I say that because, I do truly feel that, and, it's just really been great. So again, I thank you. I think it's wonderful. I appreciate having us on. Anything we can ever do to work, together, we're definitely all for that. And, I definitely look forward to seeing the events you guys got coming up, and I'll keep following you. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Brian. And then likewise. So that's Brian Mack, who sits on the board of almost every community Rev War thing in the local district. So we won't go through the whole list, but it is impressive what you're able to do. Thank you for keeping the history alive there. Make sure Google Fort Plain or fortplain.org, so you can go to find about the conference and all those good things. If you have any other questions for Brian or Fort Plain, you can also go to the emergingrevolutionarywar.org, leave us a message. We'll make sure it gets to Brian. We are, this is closing out the first month of 2022 here on the Rev War of Revelry. We'll get started back in February. We have February 6th and 20th will be our next events. So remember to check Facebook. Also too, if you want to get out onto the sites, I know we talked a lot about the different conferences, but we do have one the last Saturday in September, the 24th, the International Implications of the American Revolution, and then will be held in historic Alexandria, a partnership there. Some great speakers talking about the French, even a topic on the Russian involvement of the American Revolution, so kind of brought in the perspective there. And then if you to get out on those, we're second annual bus tour, the formation of the American Army, that'll be the Valley Forge in Monmouth. So you get the November 11th through the 13th. Information on how to sign up for that tour is on the blog at emergingrevolutionarywar.org. Historians William or Billy Griffith, who penned the Monmouth Courthouse battle for the Emerging Rev War series, and yours truly, who wrote Winner that Won the War, Valley Forge, will be the two historians leading that bus tour. So second annual Emerging Revolutionary bus tour, November 11th through the 13th. So maybe it'll be slightly as cold as it was at Valley Forge. It probably won't be as hot as it was at Monmouth in June of 1778. But to close it out, thank you for sticking with us tonight with the technical difficulties. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Promise we'll have that iron out. Brian, thank you again for joining us. We hope everyone enjoys the rest of your evening, and we'll see you back here in 2 weeks.